Today, we're privileged to have a very special guest. The streets of London on Saturdays in recent months have become, in effect, no-go zones for Jewish people. My Jewish friends from the United Kingdom tell me that there are parts of central London they simply do not feel safe traveling, walking about in every single Saturday. The situation since the horrific atrocities on October 7th has only gotten worse for Jewish people in Western countries. And this distressing phenomenon is nothing new, of course. For the better part of the last 2,000 years, Jewish people have been the victims of systematic violent discrimination in various forms, blood libel, accusing them of using babies in religious rituals, blaming them for the death of Jesus, Christians have routinely done, mob violence, ghettoization, pogroms, expulsions, attempted genocides, climaxing only in the 20th century with, of course, the Holocaust, where 6 million civilian Jews were systematically tortured and exterminated in Nazi Germany. One of the reasons that led to the creation of the State of Israel in the late 1940s. Because of the Holocaust, people have become somewhat complacent. We have thought that maybe in the West we've overcome the ancient bigotries of that kind. And in the last decades of the 20th century, I myself became complacent. I am from a Christian background, and I thought we'd gotten past a lot of that. But unfortunately, recent years, recent decades have shown that I'm wrong. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, and most disturbingly, since October 7th and the horrific atrocities that were committed, the genocidal horrific atrocities that were committed by Hamas on October 7th. Today we have as a very special guest, Mr. Stephen Silverman, who is with the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. He is the Director of Investigations. Welcome, sir, to the program. You've been fighting the good fight on anti-Semitism in the West for some years now. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background and about your organization.
Yeah, hi, James. Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. So look, I spent most of my life as a British Jew, believing that, I think like most Jews, that the Holocaust, in the post-Holocaust world, things were different. That the Holocaust, the exposure of the Holocaust, the horrors of the Holocaust had been a game changer and had finally put to bed the deranged, which is the only way of describing it, attitudes that lead to anti-Semitism and hatred of Jews, based on a wide range of increasingly bizarre conspiracy theories. I think what we've now learned is that what we thought was a new normal for Jews was actually simply an aberration in Jewish history. And what we are seeing now, in many cases, are evocations of Germany in the early 1930s, well before the Holocaust got underway, but when Jews were being marginalized, attacked, excluded, discriminated against, and it's increasing. The difference is, of course, that we don't have, it is not endorsed or supported by government, but government isn't taking strong enough action. And I suggest it's not taking strong enough action anywhere in the world against this. Lots of fine words, but insufficient action. And what that is, sorry.
Yeah. No, in my country, we've endured the spectacle of grossly anti-Semitic protests erupting on university campuses. More than 50 campuses in my country in over 40 states that have involved 2,500 arrests for various criminal activities just since October 7th. Is there something similar going on in Britain? Do you see encampments popping up at British universities?
Oh, inevitably. It hasn't taken long for it to migrate across the Atlantic and start appearing on our campuses. We have quite a number now where this is the case, not on the kind of scale that we saw on USA campuses, but still, like at Oxford University this week, people saying that resistance against the occupation is justified. In other words, saying that what happened on the 7th of October in southern Israel was legitimate In other words, we have university students at one of our most prestigious institutions openly supporting the acts of a proscribed terrorist group. And we're seeing this across society now. And it is deeply worrying. We are in very, very dangerous territory.
We were all sort of shocked at the spectacle of one particular clip where a London Metropolitan Police officer was simply preventing a person who was, in his words, too openly Jewish from actually crossing a street where there was a pro-Palestinian protest going on. He was the one actually threatened with arrest. And in both Britain and the United States, we were sort of shocked at seeing that. But it's not really that shocking. These sort of incidents are becoming more and more common. I wonder if you could give us any insight onto situations like that, and in particular, what has been the role of the Metropolitan Police in London or the Crown Prosecution Service? What role are they playing in this spectacle?
Well, I mean, the Crown Prosecution Service has been an issue since well before October the 7th, and it's been a problem for most of the time that I've been with Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. But let me address the main point first. With regards to the police, it is the police's job to enforce the law at these protests. What they are doing is managing the protests because they know that they do not have sufficient resources so that if the mob turns violent, they will be able to deal with it. So the way they prevent that from happening is by threatening to arrest people who are actually causing no harm, but whose presence might inflame people attending the pro-Palestinian protests. So you will see people not being arrested for chanting genocidal slogans, for demanding intifada, which for those of your viewers who aren't familiar with that word, means a violent uprising. And intifadas in Israel resulted in the death through terrorism of huge numbers of Jews. Calling for jihad, and completely undermining the democratic liberal values of the society within which they live. So we are told time and time again that these protests are peaceful, and they point to the lack of arrests as justification for that claim. The reason that there are no arrests in the kinds of numbers that there should be is the police know that they can't take that course of action because they do not have enough numbers. And so they will tell a man, if you try to go anywhere near that march, you will be committing a public order offense and you will be arrested. Which also puts the light to the fact that the Jews have nothing to fear from these marches. And if you saw that particular clip, you will have seen him surrounded by people calling him scum and calling him Nazi, a particular sinister individual threatening to follow him around London, all close to police officers who stood by and did absolutely nothing. Which then raises another issue that has gone quite unreported, which is if, as we are constantly told, these marches are largely peaceful people who just want to see an end to the war, and that any arrests that do take place are the result of a few bad apples. Well, what a remarkable coincidence that those few bad apples just happen to find themselves in the same location as Gideon Falter, the man who was at the center of that incident. Is it a coincidence, or is it the fact that wherever an openly Jewish person engages with that march along its considerable length, he's going to encounter abuse and harassment of that nature?
Well, it certainly wouldn't have happened had a Christian wanted to cross the street. He was apparently being openly Jewish is what prevents you from conducting your normal business in central London. That's rather shocking. But there's nothing new. Your organization has been pointing out for years. I noticed one clip, for example, from 2022, I believe it was, where a man from Cornwall and Devon was specifically being harassed. He was receiving specific threats. Don't talk to the pigs, or we're coming after you, and things of that nature. And the police weren't, they were telling him to stand down rather than enforcing laws against criminal threats simply because he was Jewish. We've seen Unfortunately, we've seen other incidents similar to that. A woman simply wearing a cap with a Star of David on it, being told to go back to Poland, where, of course, Hitler ran most of his concentration camps, and where millions of Jews were systematically killed. And people don't realize Intifada. Suicide bombers were killing innocent children in the last Intifada, and people don't realize what that means. And yet we have protesters saying, I am Hamas. There are protesters waving Hamas flags. And yet the authorities seem to be taking the side of those folks and have been for some time. This is nothing new, and your organization has been fighting this for years now, if I understand this correctly.
Well, yeah. So basically, the people at the center of the protests and who are causing a lot of the problems are very much include the kind of people who were at the center of the anti-Semitism crisis in the Labour Party, which I'm sure you're aware of, that began with the election of Jeremy Corbyn as leader at the end of 2015 and continued until the next general election in 2019. And of course, beyond that, because the current Labour leader has been, working to expunge the remainder of those influences from the party. So these are people who, espouse a radical ideology that very much is based around hatred of the West, certainly hatred of Israel, and it completely undermines the values of our democracy and society.
We think of Great Britain as the cradle of classical liberalism, of religious and political tolerance. And that's why I guess it's so disturbing for us to see this, to see it popping up at Oxford and Leeds universities. We're seeing disturbing, openly anti-Semitic chants and things of this nature. And the government has basically been soft. As you point out, Jeremy Corbyn, I know it was basically Brexit that was his demise, but his open anti-Semitism, what I can only perceive is his open anti-Semitism. What impact do you think that did have on the Labour Party, if any, or has it gotten worse?
Well, what I think it did have was an impact on society in general. It opened Pandora's box. What we saw during that very sad period was that people were now publicly saying things about Jews that had never been said publicly, certainly not in our political life. And that now you can't put the cork back in the genie back in the bottle. Sorry, that's two metaphors: Pandora's box and the genie in the bottle. But you get my drift. That's out there now in society, and that there is a huge campaign on Twitter, and it's a bit like you're probably familiar with the story of the Japanese soldiers who were still hiding in the jungle into the 1960s, still fighting World War II. It's very much like that. Despite the Labour Party having been found to be institutionally anti-Semitic by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, a body set up by the Labour Party, there are people out there denying it, and you will see the hashtag, "It was a scam." And it will not die. It's still there, and it's still out there in society, and it is doing tremendous damage.
What is partially disturbing to me, and partially, profoundly in a way disturbing to me, is the way certain news outlets simply accept their numbers from Hamas. We know that for example, they lied about that hospital bombing. It hadn't come from Israel at all. More than that, statisticians, I've spoken to more than one reputable statistician who has told me that, in effect, the Hamas numbers are simply impossible or highly, highly improbable. And yet, despite good evidence that we're being lied to by Hamas, the BBC, The Guardian, in my country, CNN, the New York Times, they simply accept Hamas numbers uncritically. That strikes me on the face of it as anti-Semitic.
Well, it's, I mean, I have to be careful what I say here, but it looks very much like to us, like a choice to accept it. They cover themselves with the words from the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, which is now a kind of verbal tick that nobody ever hears. They only pay attention to the number. And I'm not sure what the current number is, 35,000 fatalities. And of course, that includes all of the Hamas terrorists that have been killed by the IDF. We know that something in the region of 2,000 missiles fired from Gaza towards Israel have misfired and landed in Gaza, and all those fatalities are in that number. That number also includes people who have been shot by Hamas, either for resisting or for trying to follow the IDF's instructions to evacuate a particular area, because, as we know, civilian casualties are very valuable in the propaganda war to Hamas. So, and you know, you're right. I mean, I've seen reports by very reputable statisticians completely debunking those numbers, and yet they are repeated as fact by major media outlets, and every time they are repeated, it just stokes the flames of anti-Semitism that little bit further.
And we even have voices that are still being given credibility that question the very facts that mutilations, the systematic use of sexual assault, the torture, the atrocities of October 7th, there are actually voices in the media which are still going around denying perfectly demonstrable facts that can be established both through forensic evidence, eyewitness testimonies, and the GoPro tapes that the Hamas terrorists themselves were taking at the time. And yet there are still people who are given a microphone and allowed to deny this. Basic truth, it seems to me it's just as awful and incredible as Holocaust denial. And yet that form of contemporary Holocaust denial is still permitted in recent months. That's rather shocking.
It is. And, you know, anti-Semitism is regularly described as a virus for very good reasons, because once it infects society, it courses through it. Causes incredible damage, not just to the targets of the hatred, but to society in general. No society that has ever been riven by anti-Semitism has been a successful society. And then just as society believes it's vaccinated itself against it, it mutates so it can continue to thrive. And one of the most recent mutations was hatred directed at the only Jewish state in the world. But what we're also seeing now is a mutation of Holocaust denial. And like Holocaust denial, one of the reasons it exists, because it has to be a lie. Otherwise, how can I support Hamas? How can I claim that they are noble freedom fighters if this is allowed to be true? And so, you know, there's a whole industry now. And it's as absurd as Holocaust denial is absurd, trying to prove that what happened and was captured on the video cameras of the perpetrators themselves never took place.
And more than that, it's as though the language of the Holocaust has now been perversely inverted and used against Israel. Israel, as you point out, they'll send out text messages, they'll use megaphones to warn people to get out of buildings that are about to get bombed. They're doing everything they can to prevent civilian collateral damage. On the other hand, Hamas, with stated genocidal intents, and a surprise attack on civilians on October 7th actually demonstrates a genocidal intent. And yet, who are the ones accused of genocide? Israel. not Hamas. Or they'll use the apartheid language. Hamas is systematically racist. The only place you'll find any kind of religious or racial tolerance in the Middle East by Western standards is in Israel, and yet Israel is called the apartheid state. Israel is called the genocidal ones. Israel are called the war criminals. They're the ones compared to the Nazis in one of the most sick, perverse inversions of morality, where they're actually sort of using the language from the Holocaust now intentionally against the Jews.
Well, yeah, and it's deliberate because they know it's the most wounding thing that they can do. And, the genocide slur is particularly abhorrent. And it's really interesting. There is a gentleman called John Spencer. He is the chief expert in urban warfare at the West Point Military Academy. He has written extensively on this, and he has said, and by the way, this is one of the horrors of what is happening, because the people who hate Israel are forcing people like me to talk about the tragedy of civilian deaths as though they're statistics. And every single civilian death is a tragedy. But what John Spencer has shown is that in urban warfare, in the type of conditions that the IDF are fighting in, you would normally expect a combatant to civilian fatality ratio of 1 to 9, 1 combatant to 9 civilians. He says that Israel is achieving around 1 to 1, which is a figure that is unheard of and was not believed to have been possible. And he has actually said that he believes that Israel is setting an impossible standard for anyone else to follow. Now, even that 1 civilian for every IDF soldier is a tragedy. But this just shows the how malign the industry is that is determined to accuse Israel of genocide. And we've seen it with the case brought to the International Court of Justice by South Africa for transparently political reasons. And the case was brought, and all over social media, Israel's committing genocide. Then they deliver an interim ruling in which they don't say that Israel has to cease fire, but the message that goes out across social media is that there's plausible evidence of genocide. Last week or the week before, a woman called Joan Donoghue, who was the president of the ICJ at the time that ruling was made, corrected that. And she said, we never said that. What we said was that the Palestinian people have a plausible right to be protected from genocide, which is why that interim ruling did not find any evidence of genocide against Israel, and only said to it, not, put your weapons down, but said, just be careful, you observe, the international law in this respect. And yet it is now commonly accepted that there is plausible evidence that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza.
Incredible. Daniel, do we have any super chats that have come in?
So we have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. From Jonathan. Thank you so much. Wes, thank you so much. And PC, thank you so much also, who says only anti-Semites support Hamas. And then we also have a bit of an off-topic question for Phil, which says, BB aside, who objectively would be the best politician now, and who would be the best military strategist to produce a rapid and lasting Israeli victory?
Stephen, do you care to enter that?
So the thing I have to make clear here is, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism is a charity. As such, we are precluded from entering into the world of politics, and this is a purely political matter. So I'm happy to talk about things like the genocide slur and the apartheid slur because they are fueling anti-Semitism. Whoever Israel ends up with as its next prime minister is a matter for the citizens of Israel who vote there.
Right. And I understand you're constrained in this. We at the Ayn Rand Center UK have been on this since October 7th, and we have been highly critical of Western leaders, President Biden, Lord Cameron, in effect for offering rewards for the terrorists and so forth. And we've been critical of Netanyahu and his failure to respond aggressively and decisively. So I won't ask you about any of those. We've been taking a rather firm pro-Israel line on this. So I won't embarrass you any further with questions of that nature. I see Daniel's got a hand up again. Have we another question, Daniel?
We have another super chat from Phil, but since it's also political, I won't read it. And James, maybe last question, and we can wrap up, or maybe last words.
Oh, very good. Well, do tune in tomorrow. We will be having on the Daily Objective another amazing interview with Robert Spencer. And following this show in just a couple of minutes, we'll be discussing the reality show and how Israel is having to face discrimination in European gatherings, such as the Eurovision competition or athletic competitions. But I want to thank you, sir, very much for joining us today. I wonder if you have any last words. I hope we can have you on again in future. Do you have any last words? And how can people who are interested in your organization help?
Well, I mean, people, the best way that people can help is with their time. So, people who want to sign up to become volunteers, they will always be welcome. It doesn't matter if they can donate an hour of their time a week, 10 hours of their time a week, whatever it is, we will gladly take it. The other thing that I think it is important now that people understand, and I think this is the biggest thing that is going to bring about a change. And it's a cliche to say that Jews are the canary in the coal mine. Anti-Semitism doesn't just affect Jews, it is a societal disease. Once society becomes riven with anti-Semitism, it is a failing society. And what we are seeing now isn't just an attack on Jews, it's extremism that is seeking to undermine the laws, the values that we all hold dear. And if that is allowed to continue, everyone suffers.
Very well said. Thank you, sir, so very much. As I say, I hope we can have you on in the future. And for all the viewers out there, the reality show starts in just a few minutes. If you find this material of value, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK. We are providing the most hard-hitting coverage, in our view, on the war in Israel today, and we have wonderful guests such as you've just seen here. And in the meantime, especially to all of my Jewish and Zionist friends, be safe.